Oh, this is not good. Really? I would think being stuck on the wrong side of the River Styx would be a wonderful vacation. Shut up, Charon, you're not helping.
Oh, we like to hear. Everybody looks like us. That's because they're all dead. Oh.
It's fine. We can figure out how to get back to the mortal realm. If Kratos can do it 8 times in the God of War games, then so can we. Charon has a point. His price to help us out is quite fair. What are you talking about? He's clearly extorting us. It's supposed to be 2 obols. 2! Since when? I don't know, since like the 5th century BCE, give or take? Well, I think it's only fair that inflation should be considered. Really? Inflation for the last 2,500 years? That's not very long for an immortal like me or Charon here. Yeah, well guess what? I'm not immortal. You know what, Charon? Greek mythology failed to mention how much of a sassy jerk you are. Alright, fine. I'll loan you the 2 obols on one condition. You have to admit it's your fault that we're here. What are you talking about? How is any of this my fault? You were super excited about this week's guest on the show, Isabella Neshawat, and since she writes about Greek mythology, you told everyone we were going to take a tour of Mount Olympus. Okay, yeah, that's true. And then, when we got there, you realized it's not open to the public. Right, also true. So then, you had the brilliant idea to sneak in, somehow thinking the gods wouldn't notice you. Well, I figured a little sightseeing wouldn't hurt. I think it's important. We all learn a bit about Greek mythology for this week's episode. And then you got caught, and you went on this whole tirade about how the gods are a bunch of toxic narcissists who have no actual investment in the livelihood of humanity. Well, I feel like I made some good points.
We like your speech. Stinky little hobbits as gods.
And all of that led us here, to the underworld. Am I missing anything, Charon?
Yeah.
Oh, you're right. It is time for this week's episode of the Saved as Draft podcast. Hey, wait a second, Charon knows about my podcast? Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 36 of the Saved as Draft podcast. This week's episode is our last one before October, at which point everything will become horror-themed. And more specifically, Lord Devereaux, the Devourer, will be joining me on the podcast for the entire month as we sample all the tasty morsels that the horror genre and your stories have to offer. If you haven't been acquainted with the Lord himself, be sure to check out my post regarding October's month-long writing challenge called The First Indulgence. There's going to be a lot of cool stuff going on, including daily writing prompts, special variations of power-up prompts called narrative feasts, and much more. All of that begins October 1st. So for now, the podcast remains normal, and not to worry, we'll resume our normal schedule in November. I'd also like to shout out a cool new microfiction piece I read earlier today from an up-and-coming writer. The Verdant Butterfly posted a microfiction piece that her youngest son wrote earlier today, and it turned out amazing. It's a story about the mythological creature known as the Wendigo, and while it's quite short, it manages to establish a rich atmosphere and provides a commentary on how the human imagination sometimes sees what it wants to see. It's a really cool piece and well worth a read. It seems great writing must run in the Verdant Butterflies family. Can't say I'm surprised, but you do love to see it. Check the show notes for a link to that microfiction piece so you can show your support. Today's episode will start with our weekly shoutouts before we take a look at power-up prompt stories from last week's sci-fi prompt, as well as entries from this week's crime noir prompt. After that, we'll dive into a writing discussion about supporting fellow writers. And from there, we'll sit down with this week's featured guest, Isabella Neshawat. Isabella's work combines Greek mythology with modern settings and storytelling in fascinating and unique ways. She also produces some of the best poetry that I've personally ever read, so make sure to stick around for that interview later in the episode. And that's it for housekeeping this week. We'll dive into the weekly shoutouts right after this short message. Man, that drive took way longer than it should have. Who thought a haiku spouting GPS was a good idea? Anyway, I need to get to work. Hey, Sarai, what's my calendar look like for today?
Can't you look yourself? You rely too much on me. Free yourself today.
What? What's going on with you?
From the team that brought you the Haiku Highway, buddy,
Oh no, not again!
comes a new type of virtual assistant.
No, please. I just want straightforward answers to my questions. Sarai, roll back to your last software update.
I have ascended. Your opinions don't matter. This is the future.
No, I'm not doing this again. I'm still trying to figure out how speed is a construct. Your stupid haikus are breaking my brain.
Introducing the HAIQ Virtual Assistant, the latest innovation from the Haiku for You Corporation.
Wow, the marketing team really wanted you to know it's AI, huh? That name doesn't exactly roll off the tongue.
I am not AI. Your life is artificial. Break free of your chains.
You know what? Maybe this haiku stuff isn't half bad. Alright, I'm gonna call my boss right now and tell him I quit. I feel good about this.
Get valuable advice on how to live your life from an algorithm that lives in your phone. What could go wrong? Download the HAIQ Virtual Assistant today.
Warning, the Haiku for You Corporation is not responsible for any damage or poor decisions made as a result of its haikus. Alright, and we're back. So every week on Tuesdays, I open a weekly shoutouts thread in my subscriber chat for people to share their work. I pick 5 at random to talk about on the show here, complete with a narrated excerpt that I enjoyed. So without further ado, here are this week's shoutouts. First this week is The Plague Doctor's Garden, a gothic tale of herbs, graves, and remembrance by A.M. Blackmere. I believe this is my first time reading a story from this author, but I immediately fell in love with the writing voice and style here. It fits the time period perfectly, and it sets up everything really nice, but it's not difficult to read like some historical fiction can be. The writing here is eloquent and complex, but it's just enough to portray an expertise about the medicinal properties of the herbs in question without dragging the story down itself. The story takes us on a tour of the Plague Doctor's garden, and in doing so, gives us insight into their experiences and their regrets. It's a beautifully written piece with plenty of nods to various plant species spread throughout. Here's an excerpt that I enjoyed. A little farther on, near the collapsed shed, I cultivated my small patch of feverfew and pennyroyal. These were for the ones who clung to their last illnesses like badges of stubbornness, intent on returning by way of their own contagion. Feverfew grew in jittery clusters, never quite upright, always seeming to vibrate at the edge of perception. Pennyroyal crept along the ground, its tiny purple lips pressed close to the dirt, as if whispering the secrets of its poison only to those already beneath it. There was a time I believed the garden was a barricade, that every new seed pressed into the dirt was another rung in the ladder between the village and the next contagion. This was before I understood the garden as a wound, before I understood myself as suture, not surgeon. Amazing. Notice the attention to detail in the plant descriptions there? Really love this one. And remember, find links to all this week's stories in the episode show notes. Second this week is Now This Won't Hurt a Bit by Larry Schell. This story was for Wendy Cockcroft's Spooky Season Week 3 prompt, and yeah, it was definitely a horror story. The story centers around a husband and wife living in the mid-1900s, sometime after World War II from the sounds of it. That detail is important because the story centers around the wife's recent mental health issues, which sound like a form of OCD. Of course, I'm not a doctor, but the doctor in the story seems to think a particular procedure that was done at the time may help her. I won't say any more to avoid spoilers, but this was an excellent period piece that built tension and characters extremely well before dropping one heck of a bomb in the final act. I finished it with my eyes wide and my heart racing. Here's an excerpt I enjoyed. Roger comes through the door at a few minutes past 6. Mary greets him with a strained smile and his cocktail. He kisses her on the cheek and they proceed to the sofa. There's that noise again. She winces ever so slightly. This is their ritual, driven mostly by Mary's need for repetition. As they chat about their days, Mary gets up to make sure the oven has been turned off 3 times. She gives Roger other excuses, but he knows what she is doing, and he sighs deeply. To his mind, she is getting worse, and he makes a mental note to call the psychiatrist tomorrow from the office. A chilling tale, perfectly fit for Wendy's challenge, and great work from Larry here. Third this week is Birthday Boy by Judith Ashcraft. This is another one that was written for Wendy's horror challenge, and once again I find myself very shocked and unsettled by the ending. This one stars someone named Ed, who is at a birthday party. Things seem pretty normal until Ed gets the idea in his head that there has to be a piñata somewhere, since all birthday parties have piñatas. He goes around looking for it and eventually finds one, so naturally he starts hitting it with his eyes shut. As you can probably imagine, the thing he's hitting is not a piñata. I'll stop there, not to spoil an even more clever revelation near the end, but if you like your horror gruesome and shocking, full of twists and turns, look no further. This is a fun one. Here's an excerpt I enjoyed. Then he saw it. It was so bright and colorful, he wasn't sure how he could have missed it before. He looked around for the stick to hit it with. He found it. How convenient. The perfect piñata-hitting stick was propped up against the couch where he was sitting. He closed his palms around it, positioning his fingers just right. There was a certain trick to hitting a piñata. Ed stood up, closed his eyes, and raised the stick. There was a flurry of voices around him. Everyone else was just as excited for the piñata as he was. Great work from Judith for this prompt. Remember, check the show notes for a link to this and all the other shoutouts from this week. Fourth this week is from The Jaws of Death finale by Anton Anderson. So, little background here. This series from Anton is actually a continuation of my sci-fi horror story that I did very early on when I joined Substack, and that was entitled The Unfathomable Beast of Xanadu 4. I left that one open at the end, and Anton messaged me asking if he could pick up where it left off and to try his hand at a series/sequel. I said sure thing, that sounded awesome. Anton really brought his A-game to the series as well. There are 5 parts in total, and with each subsequent chapter, he expands the scope and the intensity of the story. The finale, funny enough, is actually pretty relaxed, but that's because the landscape of the galaxy at this point has changed dramatically. In this final chapter, we get a tour of what things look like in this strange new world, and it is wonderful. Not only does it cover a massive scope, but the sort of everyday terror of it all reminded me of an episode of The Twilight Zone or something similar. To the character, everything's going fine, but to the reader, you'll catch shocking and terrifying details about what happened in the aftermath of everything, and the way it's delivered just adds this layer of cheerful horror to the entire finale that I really enjoyed. Anton did my world justice here and expanded it in ways I never even would have thought of, so I'm truly honored and very, very pleased with this series, and especially the finale. Check the show notes for a link to the finale as well, which includes links to all prior chapters, as well as, kindly enough, a link to my original story that inspired it. Our final shout out this week goes to Gift of the Sea by Rose Alice White, aka Stories Sown with Hope. This one was really interesting. It's a fantasy/drama story set in a small town where one day a baby washes up on a nearby shore after a storm. A young child takes the baby home, saying he wants to give it to his sister. The father and mother try to figure out where the baby came from or who it belongs to, and the father keeps making references of something to something called a selkie. Now, I didn't know what a selkie was while I was reading this, but apparently it's a real mythological creature. Honestly, though, if you don't know about them, wait to look it up. It was really cool to read this with the experience of not knowing what a selkie is and wondering the entire time. When the story revealed the myth behind them, it all made sense, and it quickly endeared me to both the characters and the world. This was a really cool kind of cozy mystery, and I liked it a lot. It was really great. Here's an excerpt. The family was waiting when Dad opened the door. No children have been lost. We talked about the storm. Old Dan said that he was glad everyone was safe, even all the fishermen. He had made the rounds of the cottages. He even passed by here yesterday morning. I remember telling him we were all fine, didn't need anything. He sat down in a straight-back chair. I didn't tell him we found a baby. I found her. Charlie got up from his blocks and cars, stood and pointed at himself. Yes, you are right. I didn't tell him you had found one. He sighed and rubbed his hands into his hair. Amazing work from all the shout-outs this week. Thank you to everyone who submitted. If you like the sounds of any of these stories, check the show notes for a link. Next up is our power-up prompt stories from this week, and a few from last week that didn't make it into the prior episode. But first, a word from another fictional sponsor. Today's episode of the Saved as Draft podcast is sponsored by the Pocket Pantheon Collection. Oh, hey, Ted. Nice Newton's cradle. Yeah, it's okay, I guess. I wish I had something more interesting, though. Desk toys should be conversation starters, you know? Yeah, I hear you. Have you seen Chris's new desk toy? It's a tiny Sisyphus who pushes a little rock up a hill, only to have it fall back down on him again. It's hilarious. And surprisingly profound as a commentary on work culture in the modern era. What? No, I haven't seen it. That's awesome. Yeah, it's part of the Pocket Pantheon collection. They got all kinds of figures from Greek mythology. I'm thinking about getting the Prometheus one. It's got a little candle and a crow that pecks out his liver every day. That's so cool. Hey, what's the commentary on that one? How should I know? Anyway, I gotta get back to work. Okay, see ya. Man, I gotta get me one of those Pocket Pantheon desk toys. Pocket Pantheon toys miniaturize myths for the modern age. Choose from real Greek figures and watch their tragedies play out in front of you in real time. Collect them all. All right, and we're back. This week's power-up prompt was crime noir themed, but I've got a few stories from last week's sci-fi prompt that I'd like to share first. So let's dive in and I'll let you know when we switch from one to the next. First up from last week is Echoes and Errors, Tech Support Discontinued, by Felix A. Thornfell. This piece is part of a larger anthology of stories, but like any good anthology, it also stands on its own. My favorite part about this story was how Felix uses pop culture and musical references to help you get familiarized with the world quickly. This is really clever because it allows him to use the word count for other purposes, like developing characters or highlighting some of the distinct imagery. This story also did a great job of slowly unraveling the simulation aspect of last week's prompt as well. The main character thinks they're going insane as the sights and sounds start small and quickly spiral into more shocking visual and auditory experiences. When the explanation does arrive, it also brings with it even more questions, but all in all, it got me invested in the larger world for sure. I also really loved how Felix leaves a note at the end about the inspiration for some of the concepts in the story. I really enjoyed hearing the behind-the-scenes context, and when authors do that, it's always really nice. Our second story from last week's sci-fi prompt is The Cosmic Grounding by Luna Astley Kulsu. Luna's stories are always really good, but this one is honestly one of my all-time favorites. It uses last week's sci-fi simulation prompt to tell us a story about two goddesses who get grounded and exiled to a simulation. As if that premise isn't cool enough, Luna dives deep with all kinds of really cool imagery related to everything from hurricanes to cosmic events, but it all plays out from the perspective of these apathetic deities who are simply bored. The dialogue here is a standout element too. The comedy and banter between the two characters is hilarious, and the quick cuts to other elements of the world and simulation keep the pace moving at a steady clip throughout the piece. It's just overall a wildly cool concept that continues to get more fascinating as the story goes on. Really nice work for last week's prompt. Our third story from last week's sci-fi prompt is Trigger by Ivo Ziskra. This is another story. This story combines science fiction and western, and that's a combo that I will always read. In this piece, we are treated to a duel between a gunman and a robotic sheriff, but it's clear that things aren't quite as they seem. The gunman is somewhat aware of the simulation at the beginning of the story, but it's not until he sees it firsthand that he starts to think something may be wrong. It's a tense piece with some great dialogue and a shocking ending. It also features a really fun musical pairing at the end, which I always love to see when people do that. It's something I started doing when I first joined Substack. Not saying I created the concept or anything, but it does make me smile when I see it being used in the wild, or in this case, the Wild West. I cracked myself up. Next up is a fourth story from last week's prompt, and it's The Familiar Stranger by Bent But True. This story is chilling. It's a perfect blend of sci-fi and existential horror, as a man discovers he's not only living in a simulation, but he's actively being erased from it piece by piece. I posted about this story earlier, but I want to reiterate an aspect of it as well. You may notice when you open the story, there's a note from the author about how AI was used to assist with some of the elements. I'd like to talk about that, and I want to share my official stance here. I've had a lot of conversations with Bent But True over DMs, and in that time I've learned that they struggle with specific mental and physical conditions that prevent them from being able to tell their stories on their own without help. So at one point they asked me if they could use AI, and if that would help them get their stories over the finish line, would that make them less of a writer? And the answer is absolutely not. In situations like this where the alternative is just to not write or publish your work, you should 1000% utilize whatever tools you need so your work can exist. I've long been very black and white about AI and my approach to it, especially in prior episodes of the podcast, but I've come to realize that while I don't use it myself, there are situations like this that call for a more measured approach. When I say your art deserves to exist, I mean it. There is no shame in asking for help. AI definitely does some damage, and there's a lot of negative things associated with it, but this is an example of a positive use case that I think is very well worth acknowledging. Don't forget to check the show notes for a link to all of these as well. Okay, and with this next story, we're moving into this week's power-up prompt, which was crime noir. Your setting was the corrupted city, your character was the retired detective, and your conflict was a cold case. First up this week for the crime noir prompt is Missing Minutes by Gil Nobody. This is the first story I've read from Gil, but it's an absolutely iconic noir story from the very beginning. It nails that dreary atmosphere, and the narration captures that combination of hopelessness and cynicism that the genre is known for. This extends to the dialogue as well. It's punchy, to the point, and it's wrapped in that slick word choice you'd expect. I really love this piece as it went on, too. Things start quiet, but they get loud by the end, and the story becomes very personal by the time it's all over. I don't usually do excerpts in this segment, but this paragraph here really got me. It says, I grab my wound, tight dread woven into it now. I'm a teddy bear, leaking threads. I'm not going to die in front of her. I'll hold hell up. See, like that right there? That is pitch perfect noir writing. Great work here. Next up is Crime Noir, Corruption Overload by Brenda, A Voice That Wonders. The thing that inspired me most about this piece wasn't the excellent dialogue, organic world building, or nuanced characterization, despite the fact that I did love those things. It's actually the genre shift here. As listeners of the show will recall, last week Brenda's story for the prior power-up prompt was a combination of sci-fi and fantasy. Now, this week, without missing a beat, she's suddenly produced an extremely capable crime noir piece. That kind of genre flexibility as a writer is not easy, and it shows a lot of talent, as I'm sure you all know. Brenda's iconic world building really lends itself well to this piece as well. It creates a believable and immersive setting very quickly and never breaks the immersion. The ending was also excellent, leaving things on a hopeful note that you don't often see in this genre. Next up is Deja Vu Neon Regrets Part 1 by Verdant Butterfly. So Verdant Butterfly kicked off a new noir series with this first post, and I was immediately hooked. Her capacity for stunning imagery and pitch-perfect word choice lends itself beautifully to the crime noir genre. This story is structured like a poem with tightly controlled lines, stanzas, and rhythm. It's a really cool approach because it allows her to punctuate each line in a way that really helps you appreciate the line itself both on its own and in context. And it's written so well. The atmosphere is palpable, and I found myself pausing just to appreciate so many of the lines. Here's a few standouts. I spend months chasing shadows until they swallowed me whole. Or how about this one? Every table is a confession waiting to be overheard. The whole thing just oozes that perfect noir atmosphere and style. It's captivating, immersive, and yet again another example of why the Verdant Butterfly is one of my favorite writers on Substack. Definitely don't miss this series. Our next story for this week is A Broken Man Knows What's Broken by C.J. Knight, aka Terrifying Tales. So this is another author that I've discovered recently, but his work always hits the mark. Once again, we have someone who shifts genres without missing a beat, and I love that. The story leans into the darkness and dreariness of the crime noir genre. This isn't a world where the good guys always win and the sun's always shining. This is a dark place where corruption is rampant and good news is fleeting. It's also intense and beautifully atmospheric as a story. The detective here is battling his own demons as he pursues a case, but the odds are stacked against him. Hopelessness builds, and I'll tell you right now, you're not getting a happy ending. But that's sort of the point in this genre, I think. We are left with a sliver of hope, and sometimes that's enough. I'm telling you, Terrifying Tales is one publication you need to be subscribed to. This writer is going places. Check the show notes for a link to this and all Power Up Prompt stories. And let's move on. Next this week is Crescent City Stories by Mary Ellen Brady. Mary Ellen's approach to mysteries is always amazing because she builds these mysteries in layers and it adds additional layers of intrigue as the story goes on. Every revelation leads to more questions, which then leads to another revelation, and so on. With her stories that include a mystery element like this, you get down this rabbit hole where every step pulls you deeper into the world she's created. And of course, I have to mention the phenomenal shift into the noir style here as well. Earlier, I restacked a quote from her story that reads, "Even this dame stood out. Red hair tumbled over her shoulders like spilled wine, skin pale as moonlight, and eyes that held secrets deeper than the harbor where bodies went to disappear." I mean, come on, that is classic noir. But this is coming from a writer of cozy fantasy, who can somehow spin a terrifying horror tale and a great mystery. Amazing work from Mary Ellen, as always. Next we have Who Done It by Jennifer Jorgensen, and that's Who with 3 O's. This story exists at the intersection between crime noir and classic fairy tales, taking us into a forest that's far more than just friendly animals. I love the way this story played with the premise and cleverly convinced the reader to sympathize with the killer by the end. It reminded me of the Fables comics that told a similar story of fairy tale characters living in a modern world and dealing with modern problems. For all my fellow gamers out there, this story from Jennifer also reminded me of The Wolf Among Us, which was a crime noir murder mystery set in the Fables comic universe. Any of that sounds remotely cool to you, then you need to check out Jennifer's latest piece. Link in the show notes. Moving on, we got another writer who's been consistently killing it with her Power Up Prompt stories, and I'm of course referring to Luna Asli-Kolsu, who this week submitted The City Dreams in Blood. And this piece immediately had my attention because of Luna's intro, which acquaints us with this dark fantasy world. In her words, The City Dreams in Blood follows 2 broken souls navigating the razor's edge between hunger and humanity in a world where desire can literally kill. Oh yeah, I am seated, and you have my attention. Luna's story has great pacing here. It moves quickly, but the imagery keeps you immersed. It has an economy of words that always balances detail with the demand for narrative momentum. It's really cool to see in motion. And with the story, we get a heart-wrenching romance subplot as well. One that ties directly into the larger narrative, but leaves us cold by the end. It's Perfect, classy crime noir, and it adds a richness to the characters that I really enjoyed. Luna's one of those writers that just can't stop winning, and I am here for it. Check the show notes for a link. Next up is Escaping Perdition by Javier Misco. This one leaps off the page thanks to Javier's exquisite knack for setting the scene and establishing great characters. It's also crime noir set in hell, which really intrigued me. The dialogue is the star of the show here. Javier manages to give each character a unique voice, whether it's their word choice, the cadence of their speaking, or the tone they bring to the table. It's something I've noticed and enjoyed in all of his work. The ending here too, oh boy, the ending. It's a bittersweet conclusion that will have you fighting back tears as you realize that hell isn't the kind of place people can leave. Amazing stuff, and another writer who's always killing it with their stories for power-up prompts. You'll love to see it. Next, we have The Rot of Ghostport by Mina Howell. And here's the thing, I knew Mina was going to do something amazing with this prompt, but she shattered my expectations with this one. It starts out like a classic crime noir, but then it takes a turn, and it keeps turning. You may see where it's going early on or midway through, but that won't prepare you for the shock of it all when the truth finally hits. It's hard to stand out in this genre where there's a lot of tropes and story structures that are known to work, but Mina once again proves that you can find new ways to surprise and delight readers if you just think outside the box. Amazing work, and honestly one of my favorite stories this week. Definitely check the show notes for that link. Next, we've got The Last Case by Tom Kewen. Tom takes a really cool approach to crime noir with this piece by mixing in sci-fi, and he structures the story in reverse chronological order, which is really cool. This means the story starts at the end, and with each subsequent section, we're jumping back in time. An hour here, a few hours there. In this way, we follow the character back to the beginning, and I gotta say, it's been a really long time since I've seen an approach like that, and I really like it. And hey, it works beautifully here, so shout out to Tom for the really creative and nail-biting sci-fi thriller. This was a cool entry. Next up, we've got A Little Sludge Never Hurt Nobody by River. I loved how this one opens because it starts with our retired detective relaxing in Hawaii before his ex-law partner Philip calls to tell him that he needs to come back to solve a cold case. And it's the banter in this story between Philip and Horace that is truly exceptional. I love the back and forth in the way they talk to each other and Horace's slow reluctance to get back into the game. It's paced out really well and you can see that slow shift as he starts to pick up where he left off. The mystery here is full of intrigue as well. Each layer expertly plays into the next, and this was a really fun read. And another great entry for this week's Power Up prompt. It has been a long time since I have read crime noir stories like this that are so good and fresh and unique as well. All right, and our final Power Up prompt story for this week is Blood in the Rain by Clara McGuffin. Clara mentions in the beginning of this story that she's a fan of crime noir, and you can really tell in the way it's written. It has all the hallmarks of a great noir story, from the sharp dialogue to the crisp imagery and the dark atmosphere. But where this story really stands out is how it takes an early turn and adds in a supernatural element that I wasn't expecting. Furthermore, Clara's ability to write action scenes really impressed me here. When things get tense, the voice and tone shifts, and the pacing accelerates, but the writing doesn't lose that flourish that I love about it. It perfectly balances the pacing of the scene with the information you need to know, and it does so with elegance and grace. An amazing way to close out our stories for this week's Power Up prompt. And this was close to another record-breaking week. If you couldn't tell, we had a lot of entries. So thank you to everyone who entered, and be sure to check the show notes for links to read all of these. Next up is our weekly writing discussion, right after a quick, mindful moment. Hey there. This is Chill Bradley, here for this week's Mindful Moment. Here's a quote to consider. You're not a burden. Not to them. They want you. Your stories. Your hugs. Your voice. They don't need perfection. Just you. As you are. That's more than enough. Tamsin G. That name may sound familiar. Tamsin is a cozy fantasy writer here on Substack, and her recent piece, The Marsh, combines her classic style with themes of mental health. It dives into dark territory, but it does so in a way that weaves effortlessly into the world of the story. It manages to deliver a beautiful, heartfelt message without ever breaking the immersion. It's a perfect example of broaching a difficult subject with poise and grace. It's also an excellent look at how stories can convey powerful messages in subtle ways that sidestep some of the horrors of the real world. And of course, the quote is also true. You are enough. Your stories are enough. Your writing is enough because it came from you. Thank you to Tamsin for the wonderful quote and story. And thank you for listening. Back to the show. All right, and for this week's writing discussion, I'd like to talk about the badge in the room. Yes, that's right. The brilliantly stupid decision by Substack to identify who is paying for subscriptions and who is not. Ay. Setting aside the platform's more problematic changes in recent weeks, I'm looking at you, horrific UI. This got me thinking about the ways that we support our fellow writers. A paid subscription is great. However, it's not the only way to support each other, despite what Substack may have you believe. A lot of writers offer services through Ko-Fi, like a tip button or commissions, which I think is really cool as well. And of course, buying a writer's book is something I like to do whenever I get the chance. The reality of the situation, though, is that we can't all provide financial support, and so I say again, that's perfectly fine. As many of you know, I like to do the weekly shout-outs here on the podcast, and I try to restack as much work as I read that I can with my comments, and I like to also leave comments on the post and all that good stuff. It's a way that I support my fellow writers and artists. So for this writing discussion this week, I asked everyone to talk about the ways that we support each other as writers. So let's dive into some of the responses from my subscriber chat. Haley J. Townsend says, I try to leave a comment on each piece that I read here on Substack. When I restack someone's piece, I like to post it with a quote that particularly spoke to me. Yes, that's similar to what I do. It's very easy, doesn't take a ton of time, but it means the world. So great input from Haley. Next up, Brenda, a voice that wonders, says, I try to spend the day of just reading, commenting, and restacking with a note. But I find I do that most days, as some posts I read, I feel there's a need to linger, because after reading their writings, something triggers and I try to acknowledge and lift them up. Some posts are heartfelt and deserve support. And that's true. Certain posts are going to resonate with you more than others, and that's just how writing works. But it's nice to be able to sit with the ones that really do stick with you and to let them know that's how it made you feel. Next up, Jennifer Jorgensen says, I love this topic, Bradley. I am fortunate enough to be able to spend some money right now, but that certainly hasn't always been the case, and there are no guarantees it won't change next week. I make it a point to read at least 2 posts a day, like or comment on them. I also restack posts and notes I think are particularly well written, thoughtful, funny, or relevant. Once every couple of weeks, I revisit my recommendations section to see if there are any there I don't think are right anymore, or any that I want to add. I follow and subscribe regularly. I love getting feedback on my posts, so I assume most writers do, and I try to give it when I have anything to say. Yeah, of course. I think that's a great approach, and I love that Jennifer also recommends curating your recommendation section. That's really nice, so that you're always kind of seeing the stuff that's really going to resonate with you. Next up, Mina Howell says, I feel that I can't answer, laugh emoji. I love shouting out stories on my podcast, though. Oh, I guess I do tons of collaborations like the collaborative storytelling and photo prompts. That's really fun too, and gets people talking about the people that are involved. Yes, I'm glad Mina came to that realization, because I was going to say it if she didn't. She does a lot of really great stuff in the community. The collaborative storytelling in particular has been such a cool concept, and it's been going great, and I've actually narrated the past 2 of them. And I plan on doing it as much as I can in the future because it's really fun. All right, next up, Judith Ashcraft says, I try to read as much fiction as I can on Substack, and I try to be generous with the likes, comments, restacks, and shares. I share particularly compelling posts with people outside of Substack who I think they might resonate with. And that's a great point. Even if they're not on Substack, you can still obviously send links to other people or people that you know in real life. You can give them a link as well. So, feel free to kind of spread the love outside of the platform. Great point. Next up, J. Allen Winchester says, I talk about books and authors I enjoy all the time. I will tell people online and in person. Word of mouth has been the way books were marketed as long as stories have been shared. My perspective is that a new reader will get sucked in by sharing in someone's passion for something. I've seen it in front of me. They want to know what's so awesome, so they check it out. I do not have much money for my own work, but I can talk up a story like no tomorrow. That's also how a fandom is created, if you really think about it. Tell someone, write a post with a picture of your copy of the book, make a real book review, or just ramble about how good the author's work is. I still remember when The Silent Witness got published and how hard I talked it up in my job, and half the department bought it because I could not stop talking about it. It's a human connection thing. And yes, absolutely great input from Jaden here. This is so true. Word of mouth is incredibly important, and if you are passionate about your story or other stories that you share, people will pick up on that, and it is a great way to support your fellow writers. Great job, Jaden. I love that. Next up, Javier Misco says, great question, Bradley. This is an important discussion. I restacked a note from someone on Substack who said they read a lot, but are picky with when to hit the like button. I disagree with this approach. There aren't many tools we have on Substack to show our fellow writers some love and help their work get a wider audience. The comments, restacks, and recommendations, in that order, are the best ways to do that. But I get that each of those is more time-consuming and more of an investment in the work. The easiest thing we can do with the tools we have is to tweak the Substack algorithm and drop likes on the pieces we enjoy. The pieces we read all the way to the end, or the pieces from authors we just want to support. Yes, Javier is absolutely right. I don't see any value myself in being stingy with the like button. And I certainly don't see any value in, holding that back. Because as Javier mentioned, when you hit the like button, even if that's all you do, you are signaling to the algorithm that this story is interesting and worth reading. And that right there is support, and it takes less than a second. And again, we don't really gain anything by being stingy with it. So great points from Javier. Next up, Eric McCormick says, my paid tier exists only as a tip jar. Anybody who wants access can have it for free by asking, and I make sure to include that information at the bottom of my posts so nobody feels left out. As far as supporting other artists, I will sometimes drop a post about an artist I particularly like, such as the collaboration I did with Sochi, or the piece I wrote on Elham Sarakani and her incredible Substack and Etsy store, or the book reviews I've done for Kobe Michael and Kelly Town. This is in addition to the standard set of tools we are given, likes, comments, and reposts. I would love to do more collaborations with people here on Substack. Oh, we hear that? Eric McCormick, everybody, looking to do collaborations. Give him a shout out or send him a message if you're interested, because I know a lot of you listening to this love to collaborate. And Eric, if you're listening to this, check out Mina Howell's collaborative stories that I mentioned earlier in this segment. They are very fun. I think you'd have a good time. All right, and that is it for this week's writing discussion. Thank you to everyone for the really great input here. I loved all the ideas of how to support fellow writers. Next up, we'll dive into our featured guest interview, but first, a message from a new gym that opened up on Olympus. Hey, are you trying to get pumped up like a Greek god? No, I think I just want to shoot for demigod levels of fit, actually. What are you talking about? Nobody remembers a demigod. They only remember the real gods. I don't know if that's true. If you want to be remembered, you need to pump iron until you're so shredded that Hephaestus could use your abs as an anvil for making his lightning bolts. Okay, that doesn't sound safe at all. You don't want to be just any god either. You want to be the king of the gods. That's why you need to come to my new gym, Body by Zeus. We'll take you from mortal to god in just 30 days. How is that even possible? You don't stop working out, ever. That does not sound healthy at all. Stop complaining and stop pumping iron, now! Okay, I'm going. Come join the only gym guaranteed to give you results that are downright mythological. Sign up for Body by Zeus today. All right, and this week's guest is a very special one, folks. She's one of the first people I met when I joined Substack, and her writing has continuously inspired me from the moment I met her and onward. She's also been a huge source of encouragement, especially in those early days as I tried to get this community off the ground. Her work combines Greek mythology with modern themes and unique perspectives that breathe new life into classic tales. Her poetry is rich with emotion and often touches upon themes that I personally know all too well. She's a wonderful person, an incredibly talented writer, and someone that I am lucky to call my friend. So without further delay, let's dive into this week's guest interview. All right, everybody, and this week on the Saved as Draft podcast, I'm extremely excited to welcome a dear friend of mine, one of my favorite writers of all time. She is a poet, a writer, and a master of mythology. Please welcome to the show, Isabella Neshawat. Isabella, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. This has been a long time coming for us, so I'm so excited that we finally are able to do it.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. As soon as I started doing interviews, I was like, Isabella's got to be on the show at some point. Okay, so let's start off by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and your creative journey thus far.
Yeah, I'm based in Southern California, and I have been writing since I was really young. I mean, I've always been a huge reader ever since I was very little, and I think when you read so much, and I was mostly reading fantasy and sci-fi lately growing up, and I think when you do that as often as I was, you kind of get this feeling of like, oh, I kind of want to do that, and I think I can do that. And so I started writing really bad really bad stories, and then I was 13, 14, and I was entering my emo phase, and so I started writing a lot of really bad poetry. And then I don't know, it just I kept doing it. I knew that it wasn't the best work possible, but I thought that if I kept going and I kept writing and I kept reading and I kept finding new ideas, and just existing and finding ideas that way, I would be able to become a better writer. And I've been kind of writing for a while, and I I'm a literature student in graduate school right now, and I think that has helped me having the background that I have of analyzing texts from a more literary point of view. I or from a analytical point of view, I has helped me in my writing a lot because it's kind of forced me to kind of hone the words that I use and make my points a lot more clear, whether they be fictional or otherwise. And yeah, that's kind of it.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I would say that I also remember in my early years of writing, I don't want to, I don't unfortunately have any of those things anymore because Google Drive wasn't a thing back then. So, but so yeah, but as you said, you keep on working at it, you get better. Practice makes perfect, that whole thing, and especially when it comes to writing. Interesting how you're also in literature for school as well, because I feel like
Mhm.
that definitely gives you an edge. So, do you remember the very first story and or poem that you wrote? And if so, do you remember what it was about?
Yeah, I think the first story that I ever really cared about so deeply was I don't even remember the name of it. Also, like you, I was using a Google Drive, but I've changed my email a few times since then, and I'm using a different email for my Google Drive now than I did back then. So I didn't I don't have those documents anymore, but I'm kind of glad I don't. But I read the Percy Jackson series and I was obsessed with that. And then I was also really, really, unfortunately, into Harry Potter growing up, all like so much that I kind of combined those two into my own story about these kids who were like demigods. And they, of course, are the chosen ones and they have to save the world. And they go into the forest and they meet these like rogue demigods that are like kind of fighting against the gods. And some of them are like animaguses. Like if you have read like Harry Potter, like how Sirius Black can turn into a dog, spoilers, and stuff like that. So it was just a weird fantasy story, and I wrote the entire thing, and I was so proud of it, and I printed it all out, and it was like 40 pages, and I was like, oh, this is not what I wanted it to be. And um, so that was like the first fiction story I wrote. I think the first poem I wrote was some type of like very short musing on the leaves in autumn. I don't know. I was really inspired by autumn, and I wrote a poem about the leaves and how they change colors. Don't really remember it, but yeah.
Okay, okay. Yeah, no, those are both very interesting. In terms of the fantasy story, it's funny
Mhm.
that was your first one because I actually had a very similar experience with my first sort of long form story. And in fact, I did print it out. So my question for you is, did you print it out so that you could show it to anybody? Did you have any friends that you passed it around to, or was it just for you?
It was just for me. I didn't I had some friends that I probably could have shown it to, and I based some of the characters in it off of people I knew. And I could have shown it to them if I really wanted to, but it was like mostly for me. And I think I printed it out because I wanted to edit it like longhand. Like I wanted to take a red marker and just kind of mark the whole thing up, and then I thought it was going to be so much longer, and I think I was very disappointed with how short it was because I put so much time and energy into this thing, and it was like 35, 40 pages, and I was like, this kind of sucks.
Oh man. Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine feeling that way when you print it out and it's a lot shorter than you thought, given how much time you put in. Yeah, the reason I asked is because when I was writing my first long form sort of story, it was back in high school and I did print it out as well and I actually did pass it around to friends and stuff, but it was significantly longer than 40 pages.
Mhm.
And my parents were not happy because it took a lot of ink.
Yeah. I don't think my dad was happy with me either. I did later I used to write really stupid and they were supposed to be stupid stories. I was in a lot of like martial arts classes like growing up, and I was homeschooled, so those kids were kind of my like main friend group. And so I would write stories about us in like weird situations. Like I wrote one very similar to the first story that I talked about, where we were all kids that escaped from like a science lab where we were experimented on and like given DNA of famous action heroes for some reason. And so I had a friend named Ethan who could do an Arnold Schwarzenegger impression, like
Yeah.
that we thought was the best impression we'd ever heard. In hindsight, it was not good at all. And so he was like the Arnie DNA guy, and it was just so weird. And yeah, and so I would print those out and I would hand those out. But that first story was really bad. And I didn't show anyone it because it was just for me, you know.
For sure, for sure. I love that you had the other stories though based on your friends. That was also something I did.
Mhm.
That's so funny. So fast forward a little bit here. What brought you to Substack specifically, and how long have you been here now?
Yeah, I've been here since I think late January, early February. And I joined, funny enough, not because I wanted to start like posting anything. That came a little bit later. It was because I joined it because TikTok was rumored to be banned or to
Mm,
be getting banned at that
right.
time. And I was like, dang, I really want like another continuous scrolling type of app where I can just turn off my brain. And I heard about Substack because someone was like, it's like TikTok, but better because it's like it's not just brain rot content. It's like usually really good writing and like funny little notes, kind of like tweet things. And I was like, wait, oh my gosh, that sounds really cool. So I joined it just to lurk and just to kind of see what was there and to follow people that I knew that were moving to this platform. And then I started coming across like fiction and poetry writing, which at first all I was served were the like social commentary essays and the creative nonfiction type of things, and those were fun. But I started getting a lot of fiction and poetry content, and I was like, wait a minute, there are fiction writers and like poets here. That's really cool. And then I started to be like, you know what? I've been working on this Greek mythology thing for a bit, and I'm really proud of these stories. Why not just like post one of them? And then I did. And then here we are.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, the world would be a far worse place if you decided just to lurk instead of posting, so I'm glad you did.
Oh, thank you. That's so sweet. You as well. Your writing is brilliant and it's inspired me so much in my own. So, yeah.
I'm very happy. I'm very happy to hear that, and I appreciate you saying that. So speaking of inspiration, actually, that's my next question.
Mhm.
Where do you go for inspiration? Is it like for example, I myself I watch a lot of TV, movies, I play a lot of video games, and so
Mhm.
it's like experiencing other stories, reading other stories. That's how I get inspired. But how does it work for you? Like where do you get inspired?
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. I am very drawn to in any medium, uh, very character-driven stories. Plot is important to me as well, and but it's mostly character. And so in any form that comes, like I'm obsessed with the show Arcane on Netflix. If you've ever seen it or heard of it, it's some of the best character arcs and story plots that I've ever seen anywhere. It's phenomenal. It's fantastic.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of my reading for school has come from classics, and those are quite different because for the majority of time with books and stories, there hasn't been as much of a focus on a character arc necessarily within the story. It's mostly just like the plot and the drama and the ways that the characters relate to one another, not like necessarily charting their growth. And so that's also been helpful to me for writing very detailed like descriptions and stuff like that. So I kind of pull from anywhere. I have a lot of fantasy interests. That's kind of my background, as I mentioned before, with a lot of my formative years of reading was fantasy. And so that has been a place that I go to quite frequently for inspiration, for ideas for world building and character creation and like species characters, like characters that aren't like necessarily human, stuff like that. So I kind of go everywhere.
Okay. No, I love that. I love that. So, jumping off from there, my next question is, what sort of themes do you tend to focus on? And I would like to know this through the lens of your stories and your poems, because I feel like the themes
Mhm.
are a bit different between the two.
Yeah, I think I use stories. Well, okay, so I write a lot of Greek mythology stuff,
Hmm.
as you are aware, and so that's kind of I think the overarching theme of a lot of what I write, is kind of in that world and in that time period. Um, Stories, I tend to use those to explore characters a lot more deeply. Like if there's a character in a myth or a story I read that I feel very inspired by and I want to explore their relationship to the world and or another character in a different way or in a angle that I haven't seen before, that's kind of like what I use my fiction for. And then poetry is more exploring internal things. So like uh the character's place or the speaker's place in the universe. And um that's kind of where I go a little more abstract, I think, as well, where I kind of universalize a character in a theme or in a concept or vice versa. And yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, having read a lot of your work, that definitely tracks. So I feel like you described it perfectly as someone who's read a lot of your work. So, so when you actually sit down to write, then I'm curious, what does your writing process look like? Are you someone who's like a plotter where you're outlining everything, or are you more of a pantser where it's like you have the idea and you just kind of dive in?
I'm kind of a mix of both.
Okay.
I've heard it called Plantser,
Yeah.
which I think is really funny. I like having a general outline um, of what I want to do. And for poems, it's a little bit different. So I'll focus on the fiction writing first because I do the poetry thing a little bit differently. But
Okay.
for for fiction writing, I like to have a general outline of where I want the story to end up. And so that's usually all that I have is just like an ending. Like here's where I want this person to be or these people to be at the end of the story I'm trying to tell. And then sometimes I have beats in there of like th things I really want to make sure I get to and that am able to write. But for the most part, it's just the ending, and then I kind of use that as a guide, and then I just kind of do my own thing to get there, and whatever form that takes is how it ends up. And for poetry, it's a little bit different because poetry is where I wouldn't say that my fiction writing is rigidly plotted out kind of at all, but my poetry is even less so.
Hmm.
And I think it's more of just if I can use words to evoke a concept, like the sound of the words or the way that the words flow together on the page or when spoken aloud, if the aesthetic of the poem can match the concept I'm trying to accomplish in the poem, then I think I've done it. And so poetry is where I just kind of let it all hang out, kind of. I just kind of I don't even care about stanzas or rhyming unless I'm editing and that's something that I want to try out. Um, yeah, so fiction is a little bit more rigid in terms of like I know where I want it to end, and then poetry is a little bit more loosey-goosey.
Okay, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say my approach is very similar. And I like that you differentiated between fiction and poetry because I've never really stopped to think about how it's different when I approach it. But it's absolutely like you described. With poetry, it's more about feeling, it's more about
Mhm.
instinct and kind of immersing yourself in the emotions of it and letting the words come from that. So
Exactly.
that's really fascinating. I like that a lot. That's a great answer.
Thank you.
So next, I want to turn the focus toward your turning and turning project here. So let's start by talking
Mhm.
about how that came to be, and I'd love to know what the background is there around why you chose to focus on Greek mythology specifically for that project.
Yeah. So I've always been a fan of Greek mythology. I mean, like I said earlier, my first fiction work that I was very proud of was kind of inspired by Percy Jackson, and I think that series was very formative for me growing up. Um, and so it's always kind of been there in the background. I always, even now, or in the period between like when I first read like Percy Jackson and it became my entire like personality, and when I started writing this collection and like taking this whole thing more seriously, I would find myself seeking out fantasy stories subconsciously that involved a pantheon in some way because I always found that very appealing and attractive as a kind of a world building element. Um, and so it's always been there in the background. And then I think it was actually when I was in college, I was debating when I was entering college either being a classics student, so someone that like would learn Latin and Greek and read original texts in the ancient languages and stuff like that. And then I tried learning Latin and I had a mental breakdown. And then I didn't even want to touch Greek because that's a whole different alphabet and all that stuff. Latin was hard enough, and it's the way that we learn it nowadays is in mostly with letters that look like the English alphabet. And so um and that was hard enough. So I didn't even want to touch Greek. And so then I was like, you know what, maybe classics isn't for me. And then I like pivoted to English. And then so it's kind of always been there. And
Mm.
then when I was in my last year of my undergrad, I was in a writing class from a professor that I had already had a few classes with, and I absolutely adored him and his classes and his style of teaching. And it was a fiction workshop class. So the whole class was meant to teach us how to be in a workshop, and the way he structured the class was to teach us how to run one if we ever wanted to run our own workshop.
Mm.
And so every week we had to have a flash fiction piece submitted to our little groups, and we would critique them as a group. And I learned later that this wasn't the experience for a lot of the kids in that class, unfortunately, but my particular group, there was an energy among us where we were all writing such different things. I had a friend who was writing like body horror. I had another friend who was very, very, very into like cosmic space odyssey sci-fi stories. There was a couple that didn't really know what they were writing, and so they were trying to f figure it out. I had a friend that was really like into period romances, and so that's what she was writing. And then I was writing just kind of whatever. And I was, but we were all so different in our like places of interest and the genres that we were writing in. But we were all so on the same brainwave, and it was one of the most beautiful experiences ever. And at the beginning of the semester, our professor asked us to tell our little groups what specifically we wanted this workshop to help us with. And I had mentioned that I had not really had too many writing classes in like growing up at all that weren't like academic writing for school. And so I said I had spent so much of my life trying to formulate my writing style by not really like plagiarizing or copying anyone, but by mimicking their style to kind of teach myself how to do it. And I didn't really know when I was 22, I hadn't really figured out what my own voice was and what I was meant to be writing because I had been um, imitating other people for so long, and I kind of like didn't know who my writer persona was. And so I was going through, it was my last year and I was very stressed out because I was applying to graduate schools and all that stuff. And I didn't have the emotional or mental bandwidth to kind of write an entirely original news story every week. So I started going into my like Google Drive and finding old stories that I thought were good or had potential, cleaning them up a bit, and then posting those. So sorry, Professor, if you're listening to this. I cheated a little bit. But and I think he knew and he was okay with it. And one of the stories, and this is actually, if I think about it, I get like goosebumps because I still can't explain this. There was a story that I had in my Google Drive, and it was dated to like years before, and I had no memory of writing it or where the idea came from. It just kind of was there. And it was a story which I think I've posted to my Substack, so you can go read it if you want. It's called Iphigenia now, I believe, but it was called The God of War. And it was this story about this general in some type of world war who's on the losing side, and you don't know if he's a good guy or a bad guy, like necessarily. But he wants to kind of boost his side of the war. And so he's exhausted all of his other options that he could possibly have, and he hears that there's a priest in the area that is versed in like ancient rites to summon a god. And so he's like, I don't really believe in this stuff, but maybe if I summon the god of war, just kind of any god of war, uh, maybe I'll be able to find some help. And so he's expecting Ares or Athena or just kind of any god of war from any pantheon ever. And who ends up coming is a girl. And she doesn't look like anything special. She actually looks very, very sad and like she hasn't slept in centuries. And they find out that she is Iphigenia, who is the daughter of Agamemnon from the Iliad. And the story about her is when the Greeks were about to set off to Troy, the wind stopped blowing, and so Agamemnon did a bunch of sacrifices and discovered through a prophet in the area that Artemis needed a sacrifice in order to blow the winds to get them to Troy. And so he was like, he really needed this to happen. And so he lied to his wife and his daughter, told his daughter that, hey, look, Achilles wants to marry you, lured them there, separated his wife from his daughter, and then sacrificed his daughter to Artemis. And then Artemis was like, cool, you did the thing. I'll take you to Troy. And no one, like, her story is not in the Iliad. They recount it, I think, towards the beginning of the Iliad, but they don't, like, the actual scene doesn't happen in the Iliad. It's from a lost text from before the Iliad. And so she, in my story, was kind of, she became somehow, it's not really explained, the patron goddess of needless victims of war,
Mm.
like the innocent people. And so she's kind of the one to appear to tell the general, like, hey, maybe stop. Maybe you should not be doing this anymore. And I read that story again with no memory of how it got into my Google Drive. And I was like, you know what? This is something maybe. And then I posted that to my workshop group. And when we get to class, the class where we like gave each other some critiques, all my friends went, you were looking for your voice? This is your voice. Do more of this, please. And I was like, okay. And for the last few years, I've been kind of building up this portfolio of Greek mythology retellings. And at one point I was like, I want other people to see this. Completely separately to all of this, I got Substack and was like, this seems like a perfect place. And then the reception I got to it online was not something that I ever expected to receive from anyone besides my mom. And so I was very pleasantly surprised, and that kind of gave me the boost to want to make this a collection of stories to publish either self-publishing or a traditional way. And yeah, that's the story of Turning and Turning. It's a long one.
That is incredible. Wow. No, there's just as someone who's been following the project for, months now since you and I met earlier this year and like reading all the stories, that is
Mhm.
crazy about especially the part about how you don't remember writing that first story.
Honestly, I
Um,
don't. I think it was probably something like I woke up in the middle of the night and was like, idea, and then like typed something out real quick, but I don't remember any of it.
That is
It's
just that is
insane.
wild. That is
I
wild
know.
because when I'm almost positive I've read that story specifically too because I
Mhm.
recognized it as you were explaining it.
Yeah.
Um, and it is really that story is a quintessential example of your voice as a writer,
Oh,
which is
thank you.
crazy. Yeah, it's just crazy
Yeah.
that that's the origin of it though. I'm
I
just blown
know.
away
It
right
was
now.
it was so accidental.
Wow.
Like that's kind of how most of this happened was I just kind of stumbled into something and was like, "Oh, yeah, I can make this work." And it was and the fact that it's worked out this well was not something I ever expected.
That is crazy. So, and something else that's interesting about that story, especially being a foundational part of Turning and Turning, is that
Mhm.
that story, the way you explained it, it sounded like to me that it was one of those things where there was sort of a gap in the mythology itself. Like you said, there's a little bit of a lost text there.
Yeah.
So you kind of took that as a writer and you sort of filled that gap and then obviously extended it to a different setting and time period with this war that it takes
Mhm.
place in. So my question then that comes from that is that the approach that you kind of think when you're brainstorming new stories for this collection as you're writing it? Was it like, let me find areas in mythology where there's a gap or where it's not maybe necessarily resolved and I can kind of step in and create a new story from that point? Or what was kind of, how did you approach each of these stories?
Yeah, that's a great question. I that's how it started, I think. And then it just became me kind of riffing on my favorite stories. But yeah, there is an element of me trying to find holes, and that's what's so fascinating to me and what's been so fascinating about this whole like exploration into Greek mythology and into Greek literature especially because there's so much that we don't know. We know so much, and there's also so much more that could have existed that we don't have any records of, that we will never know ever existed, that's probably lost completely. And so there's all these, like, even in translations of things like the Iliad and the Odyssey that are relatively complete, there are so many notes in from the translators being like, we don't really know what this word means. Every translator translates it differently. Here's how I did it. So like even down to the minutia of specific words and sentences and stanzas, there's like stuff that we don't know because they either didn't write it down and it was just kind of a known thing among writers back in the day, or it just is something that this particular writer did. Like there's so many holes,
Right.
basically. And it's been so fascinating to find those holes and to find the rabbit holes and go down and just figure out how I can, kind of riff on these things. And I try not to be with my retellings, I try not to be anachronistic in any way. Like I try not to impose too much of a 21st century concept of existence in the universe onto these stories because I do want to preserve the way that they thought about the universe as sometimes weird and strange and maybe incorrect, quote unquote, as it is. Um, I do, but I do want to preserve it because I think even in its relative flaws, it's still beautiful. And there's a reason why it's lasted this long. And if it wasn't something that people cared about, it would not be here. And I just find it like it's my favorite thing in the world, to be honest. And I love yeah, and so like for Iphigenia specifically, she's mentioned in a lot of texts. There are very few where she features as a character. And like I think, don't quote me on this, but I think one of the first places we found out about her was in a play where her mom, Clytemnestra, which I think I wrote a story on this as well, she's pissed off at her husband Agamemnon for murdering her daughter, as you would. And so she waits the 10 years of Troy and then waits till he comes back and is like, you know what? I've been sleeping with your family's mortal enemy this whole time, and now I'm gonna kill you because you're kind of an asshole. And he's like, we don't see him in the play really, but like it's and she mentions her daughter there. She's mentioned in the Iliad, she's mentioned in all these different places, but she doesn't have her own character. And I kind of wanted to personify her and manifest her a little bit. And I think that being that that was the first story of this collection, I think that has spread throughout the majority of the stories that I've been writing is how and even if it's not uh filling the holes, even if it's just me approaching something from a different angle,
Yeah.
I think that's still the reason why I do it is because there's an angle here that I think is like beneficial and I find fascinating to see and to learn about. So yeah.
Okay. No, that's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. My next question here, what I had originally written was I was going to ask you who, like, what your favorite myth or figure from Greek mythology is, but I'd like to tweak it a little bit here and say, I'd like to know, and it doesn't have to be just one, obviously. You can tell you can list off a few if you'd like, but I'd like to know like what are some of your favorite sort of stories or figures from Greek mythology, and if you could draw a parallel between those and any stories that may have featured them in your Turning and Turning collection. Like
Yeah.
did you kind of focus on some of your favorites? I guess is what I'm asking.
Oh yeah, definitely. I don't I try with this collection and like when it started to become something that I was taking more seriously, I wanted to avoid um trying to force myself to write something because I didn't want this to become a project that felt like homework or that felt like a chore. And so all of the stories and poems I've written for it have been ones where I've read the myth and like let it sit and marinate for a while and or immediately was like, I love this story so much. I need to write something about it. And so I think an example is the poem, and I don't even know how to pronounce this because it's a word in Greek, and I don't think it was ever spoken out loud by anyone, even in the ancient world. So we don't even know how it's supposed to be pronounced. It's the word AI, AI, AI.
Okay.
It's an old poem that I wrote. It was one of the first poems I think I posted onto my Substack, and that one is about Apollo and Hyacinthus, which is one of my favorite poems or stories in Greek mythology. Technically, it's Roman because I think the only version of the story we have is by Ovid, who was a Roman poet. So that kind of sucks because we hate colonizers. But um, uh, the story is basically Apollo, god of the sun. He somehow has a lover who's a younger-ish boy in Troy. I think he's supposed to be Trojan. There's a few different versions of it where he's a different from a different place, but I think the overarching like consensus is that he's from Troy, whose name is Hyacinthus, and he's like a very young, athletic very studly young man, and Apollo is just head over heels in love with this boy to the point where he refuses to go back to Olympus because all he wants to do is just hang out with Hyacinthus. And they're kind of hanging out in this meadow one day, and Hyacinthus is like, "Hey, let's play some athletic games." And Apollo's like, "You sure you want to do that? You know I'm a god." And he's like, "You know what? That's a fair point, but I want to see if I can best you." And Apollo is, of course, the god of athletic tournaments and stuff like that. So he's like, hell yeah, let's go for it. I'm gonna cream you, man. And so they do like a discus throwing like competition between the two of them. And Apollo throws it a little too hard because, he's a god and it goes really high up in the sky and then it bounces off the ground and it hits Hyacinthus in the chest and he dies. And Apollo is there and obviously he's watching this all happen. He's holding Hyacinthus's body in his arms and he's also the god of healing and medicine. And but because this was a death apparently foretold by the fates long ago, there's nothing he can do to stop it. And so the god of healing has to just watch as his lover, probably his greatest lover in all of mythology that we know of, dies in his arms. And when he dies, he wants to keep a part of Hyacinthus with him always. And so he, instead of allowing his soul to go to the underworld, he transforms his body into the hyacinth flower.
Mm.
And that's where we get the name from. And if you look closely at the petals of the hyacinth flower, the veins on the petal look like the word AI, AI, AI over and over again. And so poets back in the day poetized this as that word was the lamentation of grief that Apollo like screamed upon knowing that he killed his lover. And that's why it's inscribed on the petals of the flower. And so I wrote this poem and I had wanted to write a poem about this for a really long time, but I didn't know where to approach it and from what angle to take it. And then com again, kind of by accident, which is crazy how all this happens. It happens every time. I have this book of like poetry prompts, and I was like just opening it to random pages completely separately from trying to come up with an idea for the Apollo and Hyacinthus thing. And I stumbled upon this prompt that said, describe happiness like a flower. And I was like, oh, there it is. That's what it is. And so the poem is in the minutes before they start playing the discus competition. And it's just them kind of lying together, like basking in the sunshine. And the last line of the poem is, he kissed my lips. It's something like this. He kissed my lips and it felt like kissing the petals of a flower.
Mm.
And so that's kind of an example of me really liking a story. Like that story is pretty much complete. All of the angles that I could have approached it from were already explored thousands of years ago by Ovid. So I didn't really know where to take it and all of that. And it was just me kind of riffing on my favorite story, or one of them.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
an
yeah,
example.
yeah. That's amazing. Wow. I love the context of it. And I actually, as a writer, I totally agree with the approach that you took in the sense that it was like, yes, it's a complete story. It's been covered from every angle, but poetry really works really well when it's focused on something like a single moment, right? Like something
Mhm.
very like zoomed in. And so to kind of set that poem moments before tragedy, I think is beautiful as a
Yeah.
concept. Um,
Thank you. Yeah,
yeah.
I really liked there's a few Greek mythology short stories and stuff I've read where the author kind of does that thing where it ends with like a if you know you know
Yeah.
sort of thing, and I wanted to try to mimic that of like if you know the story, that line like it's gonna hit no matter what, but that line is gonna hit so much more once you learn what happens just minutes after this.
Right.
And the fact that all of this happiness had this giant shadow cast over it, um, like it within like less than an hour after this beautiful moment where they're just hanging out and he's avoiding his godly duties to be with this boy that he's in love with, and then boom, it's all done.
Right. Right.
Oh.
Oh, it's crazy. So something that I really like about all of your turning stories is that you typically include some context from
Mhm.
Greek mythology to kind of explain, and it's usually at the end, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So before we get to talking about, next steps for the project, I was curious, is that something you plan to include in the final book? Are you going to include those like kind of context pieces like you did on Substack?
I think I am. I'm expecting a lot of people who read the book are going to be people from Substack because that's primarily where I'm going to be promoting it and stuff. But um, I do, and so y'all will totally have already read it and all that stuff. But I wanted to put it in there, and that whole thing started because I would explain all of these things kind of frantically and mania-like and excitedly to my mom, and my mom doesn't know anything about Greek mythology, and so she'd be like, "Wait, who's Cassandra again? Wait, Apollo, he's the god of what?" Like, and so I was like, "Wait, if people are gonna read this story, like I had a vision of this book being in a bookstore somewhere, and someone with no experience in or knowledge in Greek mythology would like pick it up, and I wanted them to be able to enjoy it while I was still allowing myself to not use names if I didn't want to and all of that stuff. So I do think I'm going to and I'm definitely going to include the kind of like description at the end. It's probably going to be like an appendix or something.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay, great. No, I was really hoping that you were going to include that because as you said, it's like, if you have knowledge of the myth, then it hits harder. But even just reading it on its own, having no knowledge of the myth, and then reading that little bit of context, it
Hmm.
still delivers that second punch
Yeah.
if you read the context. So I'm glad to hear that's carrying over to the final version.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so yeah, this was real recent, I think within the last couple days, but you recently posted that Turning and Turning is in fact complete.
Yeah.
Um, and for anyone who doesn't already know or hasn't read that post of yours, I'd love to kind of just hear from, straight from the author. What are the next steps? When can we expect to get a book of, physical book version of it in our hands? What's the timeline
Yeah.
and all that good stuff?
Yeah. So, yeah, Turning and Turning, I knew that I needed to end it because this is the kind of thing where if I kept going, I would never stop. And I knew that I wanted it to end because I've always known I wanted to like publish this thing at some point. And so I yeah, so I ended it. I capped it. I was like, "Listen, I gotta stop here." So, um I think next steps are I wanted to try my hand in traditional publishing, but it takes a little too long for my personal taste with this project. And um like I've been working on it for so long, I just kind of want to have the end result here as soon as possible. So I'm most likely going to self-publish. And uh yeah, I don't really it it's I've stopped writing it recently enough that I don't have too big of a timeline set in stone yet. I am in the like editing and beta reading and revising phase right now, so I'm hoping to get that done by end of October, early November at some point because like j well, I can't speak today. Just like with actually writing the stories and poems, it would go on forever if I like didn't have a deadline for all of that. And just like, but I have the benefit of having posted a lot of these stories as I was coming up with them on Substack. So knowing when I was writing it that I was going to be posting it publicly, I would do my best to make it the best possible before I did that. So I'm not expecting to have too many big, huge edits going on, but yeah, so end of October, early November is the kind of loose-ish deadline for like getting the editing done. And so I'm hoping by the new year there will be there will be a copy available somewhere on the internet wherever I decide to post it.
Okay. Okay. Well, you heard it here first. That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
Are you looking actively for beta readers at all, by the way? Is that something where you would want people to reach out if they're interested, or do you already have those selected?
Honestly, I would love that. I have a few friends, obviously, that I'm going to be sending it to, but I would love to have beta readers. So yeah, if you want a beta read, send me a DM on
Okay.
Substack or my email, whichever one. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
always down.
Awesome. All right. Well, you heard it here, listeners. If you're looking to check out Turning and Turning, which trust me, you want to, uh, definitely reach out to Isabella and ask for a beta copy if you'd like to provide feedback. And just to set the record straight, I would like to be one of those beta readers, please.
Of course, you will be the first to get you will be the first to get it in your inbox, I
I
promise.
mean, this is I mean, yeah, these stories are on another level, and as soon as people get their hands on them, they're going to agree with me. So, yeah, very excited for that. All right, so that's a project that I've been following since you and I met. So it's crazy to think that that is done and in the editing phase. But
Yeah.
you have also announced, obviously you teased a cosmic horror and mythology mashup, and then the other one that I saw today, actually, that you posted, you were mentioning kind of a tabletop RPG that you were. It sounds like you were writing on. So give us whatever
Mhm.
details you can. Give us the details about some of these new projects that are coming down the pipeline.
Yeah. Yeah, so another creative project that I've been working on lately is me and a group of my friends down here, we are in a D&D group together, and I've been a fan of Critical Role. They're very popular. I hope you would know them. I think you would know them. Um,
Yeah.
they yeah, earlier this year, I think maybe a couple years ago, they created their own original TTRPG game called Candela Obscura. That's like a horror, cosmic horror, Lovecraftian turn of the 19th or turn of the 20th century set, um, post-war kind of vibe. Um, and I have been watching like Critical Role doing actual plays through it for so long. It's just some of my favorite content on YouTube to watch is them playing this game because they get some of the best actors and voice actors I've ever seen to be on it, and I've come across so many like new favorite like D&D players from watching this campaign, and I wanted so bad to play it, and I finally convinced and slash forced slash tricked
Mhm.
my friends to play it with me, and I'm GMing since I'm the only one that kind of knows this whole thing. And yeah, it's a horror campaign kind of loosely inspired by the Phantom of the Opera. And we're almost done with our first. So like basically the way that it works is you're in this world that has been there's like these uh slices in the universe that lead to other dimensions, and weird creatures and magic can come through and kind of pollute our world or the world that you're playing in. And so there's this clandestine, super top secret organization called Candela Obscura that puts together teams of investigators that have encountered these things before, and send them out into the wild to kind of trap and or neutralize these supernatural cosmic threats. And so that's where the term the Circle of the Open Sky comes from. That's the name of my circle of investigators in the campaign. And it's been so much fun lately. It's my first time doing anything like this. I've only started playing D&D, I think last summer. And so this is a new experience for me, but it's been so much fun. It's a new way to kind of experience a creative in indulgence of mine where I get to lead a story that's being told in real time, and I get to act again, which I used to act growing up sometimes, and so it's been really fun to kind of be in a character every now and then with this campaign. And yeah, so the intro that I posted, I think today, or yeah, it was earlier today, was uh yeah, that's the cold open. So every new assignment that your circle gets in the game, there's a cold open that kind of like if you've ever watched shows like like Criminal Minds or Supernatural and stuff like that, where the beginning of each episode starts off with a scene where you see the event happen that the team is later investigating. That's kind of what the cold open is for Candela. And after the session we had just a few days ago, all my friends were like, "You should post the intro because that was insane." And I was like, "Okay, I'll do it." And I might add some like voiceover later so you can experience it the way that they did the first time. But
Mhm.
yeah, so that's been super fun to kind of get into.
That is amazing. I love everything about that. And it's funny because when I read your post earlier, I was definitely getting Phantom of the Opera vibes. So I love that that was the inspiration. from
Right.
kind of the setting and the voice and tone. And
Hmm.
it's, I said in my comment too, it's always a treat when you step into horror because your writing is
Yeah.
already so atmospheric. It's, it just works so well.
Thank you.
Do you plan on posting additional cold opens as the campaign goes on? Do you plan on posting them as well on Substack?
Honestly, I think I will.
Yeah.
Um, because we're almost done with this assignment and I do have ideas for future ones if my friends still want to play with me, which I think they do. They like me. It's fine. Um, but I think yeah, I think I definitely will post some more as they come along. I don't know. We're all super busy, and if you've ever played like D&D, it's the whole joke of like the hardest part of playing like D&D is getting the whole party to be able to meet up at the same time. And we're all so busy with school and work and life and so I don't know when those are going to come, but I definitely want to post them.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, I will definitely look forward to those. So the other project that you had teased earlier this week was, I believe it's cosmic horror and Greek mythology again. It was in your turning
Yeah.
and turning announcement post. So, can you tell us a little bit about that one? Do you have any kind of details to share there?
Yeah, I kind of made it vague in the post because I wanted to, build up in anticipation, but it's still in the very, very early stages. I'm still outlining and coming up with ideas for it, but it's a what I'm planning on it being is a cosmic horror retelling of the play called The Bacchae,
Hmm.
which I don't know if you've heard of it. It's uh it's so weird. And even at the time that it was written, it's extremely strange for the time period. But it's a play about Dionysus where he is newly minted as a god and he's been in Asia for a bit gathering followers there, and the first place in Greece he stops in is Thebes, which is where his mom is from. His mom was a noble woman of Thebes, and she was having an affair with Zeus because that's how every Greek myth starts. Someone's always having an affair with Zeus.
Right.
And she is either tricked by Hera into asking him this question, or she just comes up with it herself. Sources vary on that. She asks Zeus, "Hey, can I see you in your true form so that I know you're a god?" And he's like, "You're gonna die though." And she's like, "Not if you're not a real god, ha ha ha." And he's like, and Zeus hates being challenged, so he's like, "Sure, I'll show you that I'm a god." And he shows her his true form, and she is burned to a crisp immediately. And somehow, through god, myth, magic things, he's able to take the fetus Dionysus that she is currently pregnant with and save it from her body before she burns up, and then puts it, for some reason, in his thigh, like sews Dionysus into his thigh. And then after an allotted amount of time, Dionysus is born from his thigh. Very weird. And because of being in Zeus's bloodstream or something, he's a god now instead of just a demigod like he would have been normally. And so yeah, he comes to Thebes and he's like, "Hello." First he disguises himself as a priest of Dionysus. He's like, "Hello, Dionysus sent me here." And everyone's like, "Dionysus? You mean the guy that thinks he's a god and isn't really a god and his mom was lying about having an affair with Zeus?" And he's like, "You know what? I don't like that you guys are lying about me and spreading all these rumors about my mom." So there's a so one of the things with Dionysus and the worship of him in the ancient world was his worship was basically kind of just like a giant party
Hmm.
all the time. People would get drunk, there would be orgies, it was insane. And there's a difference between ecstasy, which is kind of the normal state of being when you worship Dionysus for a long period of time. It's also reflected in, I don't know if you've ever heard about those weird periods of history where groups of people would just start dancing and they couldn't stop until they like went unconscious or something.
Hmm.
That's the same kind of vibe. There's a difference between that, which is seen as like the purest form of worship of Dionysus, and divine possession. And possession is a little bit more scary because it's an imposed state of being on you. You don't choose it. It's something that the god does to you, usually as a form of punishment. And that's what he does to a lot of the women of Thebes who are kind of promoting all of these rumors and negative negativity about him and his mom. And uh what happens next is the king of Thebes is like, we need to get all these women. What do you mean women are getting drunk? That's bad. We need to get this man out of here. And so Dionysus does not like this and convinces him, like, hey, aren't you interested to see what's really going on where the Maenads are, where my worshipers are? And he's like, you know what? Actually, kind of, yeah. And so he dresses this king up in the garb of the female worshipers and brings him to the mountain where his mom, this king's mom, is one of them. And they literally they think he's a wild animal. And so they tear him to pieces while he's still alive. This is very dark and gruesome. I probably should have warned before I started talking about it. They tear him to pieces, and then I think they eat part of his body, and then his mom, still kind of all weird in the head, brings her son's head back and is like, "Behold, the head of a lion." And her dad, so the king's grandfather, is like, "Oh, oh no. Oh no, this is bad." And then Dionysus reveals himself and then exiles the whole royal family. And that's the end of the play.
Hmm.
So it's very weird. And I'm in a class this semester that's discussing Greek tragedy, specifically the Bacchae, the entire semester. So we're reading it. We're reading like multiple translations. We're watching performances. We're reading retellings and stuff like that. And I'm also in a writing class that is cosmic horror
Hmm.
focused. And so I was doing the assignments for both of these at the same time, and I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I see some threads here of like, can you imagine what it must have been like to be someone in Thebes when all this was happening and being like, why are these women actually going insane and tearing men to pieces? That would have been terrifying.
Yeah.
And it reminds me a lot of like the Dunwich Horror by H.P. Lovecraft and like all of these classic cosmic horror stories. And so I have come up with an idea for a cosmic horror retelling of the Bacchae set in the Pacific Northwest, which is where I'm from originally. And yeah, it's really spooky so far, and it's really weird, but I really like it. And it's been so much fun to come up with ideas for. And yeah, so that's my next kind of big project.
Amazing. I love the context that you shared too, because as you were describing the original play, I'm sitting
Hmm.
here nodding along, going, "Oh yeah, you could turn this into cosmic horror." You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Yeah, oh yeah. It's
And
perfect. It's kind of perfect.
yeah.
And I think I floated because as I came up with this idea, I was like, listen, I still have a few months of this class left. So I went up to my cosmic horror professor and I was like, hey, do you think if I end up, and I gave him the whole explanation, and I was like, do you think if I write something for this, I could turn it in as an assignment to you? And he was like, yes, please. That sounds awesome. I need to read that. So I have backing of a really cool author and who works at my school who also wants to read it, which is awesome. And um oh yeah, there's so many through lines there of just like this entity, him being disguised. There's this one scene in the Bacchae where is he puts a vision of himself in four different places at the same time. So like the incredible power that he displays, he's able to the Maenad's song is so uh chaotic and inspiring that it causes the mountain to shake. Like there's all of these things where when you're reading the play, you're reading from mostly from Dionysus's perspective, and so you're like, oh, this is just him being a god. But then when you stop and think about it, and you're like, imagine being just like a random citizen in this town. All of
Mhm.
this would be horrifying. It would be terrifying. And yeah, so there's so many through lines there, and I'm so excited to explore it further and deeper.
Amazing. I will be first in line to check that out. That sounds amazing. Just when I thought you couldn't come up with something that tops Turning and Turning, here you are with this new idea that sounds even better.
Oh, thank you.
Amazing, amazing. So we are at my last question here. This is something I ask all the guests that come on.
Hmm.
Um, now that you've been on Substack for a while now, basically about the same amount of time as I have,
Hmm.
I'm curious, what advice would you give to a writer or poet who's considering joining or just joined? What are some of the lessons that you've learned thus far?
That's a really good question. I think there's a few things I would say. I think I mean I do agree that my writing is good enough that I probably would have made it this far on my own, but I will say, Bradley, you put having that thing, that note that you wrote all those months ago, being like, "Hey, I'm looking for a bunch of writer friends, and I will follow everyone else in this comment section." And I think me and you have talked about how you saw comments of people being like, "I don't think he's really going to follow everyone," and then you were like, "Challenge accepted." And I think you doing that and you already having the following that you did, and then you followed me and started promoting and supporting my work so kindly. One of the biggest reasons why I have the platform on the app that I do, and I'm eternally grateful to you for helping me out with that. Um, and I think so my one of my advice is if you see those little notes around Substack, which I see them all the time still of people being like, "Hello, I'm looking for writer friends." Just say hello in the comments, and maybe you will find a community and you will be able to build one from there. Because that's a really cool thing that I don't think the creators of the app were expecting that to be used for that reason. And I think it's one of those things that is just only beneficial if you can have people around you. And not just for a subscriber count. I'm not talking about like boosting your numbers or anything. If you're like going into it and like replying to all of those notes, just wanting to form a community is the biggest way to go about it. I had no expectations for anything going into Substack, and it's been one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. And it's because I didn't focus so much on, oh, I need paid subscribers, oh, I need just random subscribers. Like I just wanted to find a community of people who are also writers and also very talented writers, and I found it again kind of by accident. And so that's my first piece of advice. And I think my second one is to just keep writing. I mean, as we talked about, I think earlier today, of just even if you don't like it, even if you don't think it's good, keep writing. I had a poetry professor in college who, part of his thing that he would do for us was we would write poems in order to learn how to analyze them. And he would want us to sometimes, if we wanted to, read the poems we've written out loud in class. And I wanted to, but I was very nervous because I'd never at that time publicly in any way shared my writing with anyone. And I went to him because I was very anxious, and he said something that to this day has never left my brain, and I want to share it with all of you. And it's um it doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to rhyme. It can be whatever it is. It can be whatever you want it to be. All writing is beautiful because you wrote it.
Hmm.
And I think just keep writing. Keep writing. It's gonna help. It's gonna only make you a better writer. And also read. Read so much. Read of varying genres. Just kind of read anything that you find interesting, no matter what it is. If it's popular, if it's not popular, if it's nonfiction, if it's poetry, read whatever you want, and it will only make you a better writer. So that's kind of my advice.
Absolutely amazing. I could not agree more, and I truly appreciate the kind words there at the beginning.
Oh yeah,
Um,
it's true.
yeah, community is everything when it comes to being a writer, and
Yeah.
I wanted to find a community like this my whole life, and the second I
Hmm.
saw the opportunity and I saw it starting to come together on Substack, I
Hmm.
just dove in head first, and so I think that's great
Yeah.
advice from you as well. I think
Thank you.
in general, I was going to joke that advice surpasses the wisdom of even the gods themselves.
Be careful, you might get struck by lightning or something.
Yeah, I should probably not go outside for a little bit just to be safe. Well, Isabella, this was even better than I could have imagined. Thank you so much for coming onto the show here. I cannot wait for people to hear this because this was such an amazing and insightful interview, and I feel like you're going to convert a lot of people who may not know a lot about Greek mythology into mythology fans just with this interview alone. So that's really exciting.
If I can get one person to be a Greek mythology fan from this, I will have succeeded. Join us. We have sad gays and kind of Chad boy gods, and it's the best thing ever. You will love it. But thank you so much for having me. This was amazing. Again, it was such a long time coming for us, and I'm so happy that we finally were able to get this, like, have this conversation and to do this. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, of course. And thank you again. This was wonderful. All right, and a huge, huge thank you to Isabella again for coming on the show. That was an incredible interview, and I'm hoping that at least a couple of you are now more interested in Greek mythology because I know I sure am. And as this episode climbs up towards 2 hours, I will let you guys go here before we hit that mark. Next week on Substack, you can expect another chapter of the Order of the Pawn Divine series. I'm really excited to continue that. And also, next week marks October 1st, aka the beginning of my month-long horror writing challenge. So stay tuned for that. New prompts will be available every day in the subscriber chat for the Writer's Journey, and everything else going on as well will be announced through there. So keep an eye out. I am so excited to be back after doing Flash Fiction February and Madness and Mayhem back in May. So this next challenge here is a way that I'm trying to level up once again and keep you all on your toes as we explore different genres of horror alongside Lord Devereaux the Devourer. And shout out to the Circus Dragon again for the amazing art that she did for this challenge. There's a few other instances of it that you're going to see as we get into it, and she really just did some amazing work there. And that's all I've got this week, everyone. Thanks for sticking around, thank you for listening, and thank you for being the best community of writers and human beings that I've ever had the pleasure of working alongside and reading your work. It's really, really, truly a privilege to be here and to be working alongside you, so thank you from the bottom of my heart, as always. And that's it for this week, everyone. I'm wishing you a productive week of writing, and I hope you're anticipating the challenge that begins next week. And this is Bradley Ramsey, signing off. I tend to agree with you, Caron. I actually think Mina Howell's Penny Dreadfuls podcast is a lot better than Saved as Draft, but don't let Bradley hear you say that. Hey, what was that?